After World War I, the signing and creation of all peace treaties to do with the defeated nations were held, made, whatever, at the Paris Peace Conference. Treaties that happened here are treaties such as famous ones, the big ones, Versailles, Saint Germain, and the Ottoman one. I don't know what it's called. These treaties, which camera was I? Fuck. These treaties made many of the new nations that we saw after World War I. Nations such as Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Yugoslavia were all created as a side effect of these two treaties right here that were part of the Paris Peace Conference. The first nation that I'll be covering is the nation of Hungary. When World War I began, Hungary, as the second half of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was put to war with the Austrian reaction to the death of Franz Ferdinand. The Hungarians fought and died for a monarchy they had become increasingly unfond of, yet had no choice but to obey. After the war, the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye would dictate the borders of the newly independent Hungarian state, seeing it lose 2/3 of its population and territory to Romania, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia respectively. Almost immediately, a communist revolution would seize the country, and it would last 133 days before having its ass whooped by the same coalition of nations that had taken its land. The communist revolution would cripple Hungary's economy even more than it already had been by the war, and it would birth far-right radicalism in the country. After the Revolutionary War and the signing of the new Treaty of Trianon, which had limited Hungary's army size, the nation's border would solidify for a time. During the time of peace experienced here, the Hungarian government under Miklos Horthy would attempt to regain the strength it had lost economically and ease the various political tensions plaguing the country. It would prove fairly successful, with no attempts to end the new government after occurring after 1926, when the former monarch tried to overthrow the government. Going forward, the rise of Hitler and the economic state of the country would see far-right radicalism becoming more and more popular as the years went on. Anti-Semitism in particular would take hold in Hungarian public conscience, seeing as how the public believed that the Jews had taken part in the Communist Revolution of 1920, which again had crippled the economy. Not much more of importance or interest would happen in Hungary until its acquisition of Transcarpathia and southern Slovakia in 1938 with the First Vienna Award. This would regain some of the core population that Hungary had lost and further align its interests with that of Germany. Soon after, Hitler would invade Poland in 1939, which Hungary would hold off on joining despite having become increasingly aligned with Germany in the previous years. The Second Vienna Award in 1940 would see Hungary annex the region of northern Transylvania, easing a large component of the tensions that remained between Hungary and Romania. Soon after these diplomatic acquisitions, Barbarossa would begin in 1941, and Hungary would join the battle against the Soviets, ending the country's interwar period. Before, and especially during World War I, Balkan Slavs had long been suffering under the ethnically oppressive Austro-Hungarian Empire. Before the Austrians arrived, they had lived for centuries under the less oppressive but still not great Ottoman Empire, which had gotten progressively harsher as it lost regional and international power. This is all to say that at some point, the Slavic Balkan people, who had begun to identify with each other on account of getting fucked by foreign powers all the time, wished for something of a plan. This is all to say that at some point the Slavic Balkan people, who had begun to identify with each other on account of getting fucked by foreign powers all the time, wished for something of a pan-Slavic union. When World War I ended, they would sort of get what they wanted. As a beneficiary of the Paris Peace Conferences, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes would be formed on December 1st, 1918, in the wake of the Austro-Hungarian Empire's dissolution. Yes! Oh, yeah! This new nation was formed for a few reasons. Firstly, and least importantly, the people wanted it. Secondly, the Allies had agreed to do it, which doesn't usually mean anything, but these were Europeans we're talking about, so, you know, there's some honor there. Third, and most important, the Allied powers wanted a state that could govern itself and stop whining about being oppressed all the time. There was something of an issue with this new union, however. It was not an equal one. It was a Serbian-ran state with a Serbian dynasty in charge. This wasn't an issue at first, but as the new war approached and the Serbian dynasty once again became more oppressive, as dynasties do, tensions in the country began to soar. Another issue can be found in the name of the country. The Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes set up the state to be one of just 3 separate peoples. But if you know your geography, or if you look at a fucking map once in a while, and you look at where Yugoslavia used to be, you'll see a lot more than just 3 countries. These unspoken minorities of the kingdom would face the majority of the oppression throughout the nation's years. I didn't point it out before. Well, this is my rough map of Yugoslavia. I'll probably put up a better one, but when I put up the better one, I just want everybody to appreciate how fucking awesome this map was. I drew this from memory. That's a lie. I sort of drew it from memory. And yeah, I'm a fucking artist. Anyway, in 1929, King Alexander I would rename the country to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which roughly translates to the land of the Southern Slavs. Yugoslavia would never have a soaring economy during the interwar period, and would never quite match up to its neighbors such as Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. And it would mostly just live off of foreign aid, subsistence, fuck, there's a word for that, I don't know what it is. Yugoslavia would go on throughout the rest of the interwar period, mostly just trying and sort of failing to ease the tensions throughout the country. King Alexander I would be assassinated in 1934 for being an oppressive monarch, as most were. In 1941, Hitler would come for Yugoslavia. To their credit, they did not fold to Hitler, but they did not stand a fucking chance militarily, and so they got occupied almost immediately, ending the nation's interwar period in 1941. Booyah, bitch. Throughout World War I, droves upon droves of Bohemian, Slovakian, and Moravian men would enlist into the French Foreign Legion. Their goal was to win international support and recognition for an independent Czechoslovakian state. They would fight in not only World War I, but also in the Russian Civil War until its conclusion in 1919. Ultimately, over 70,000 men would join these Czechoslovak legions as part of a wave of nationalism sweeping across Europe at the time. These men would get what they wanted. A united Czechian and Slovakian state would be carved out of the remains of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918, looking somewhat penis-esque, as you can tell. The country would function as a democratic republic, making it one of very few pure democracies to be found in Europe at the time. Bohemia, under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, had been one of the few regions that was well-developed economically and industrially. Czechoslovakia, the new country, would make good use of this economy, developing itself both economically and militarily. Diplomatically, Czechoslovakia found itself in a pretty shit place. It had Hungary. Here, one second. No, I threw my eraser. So, Czechoslovakia, bad position. Poland, who it's not quite too friendly with right now, to the north. Romania, kind of bordering on the tip here, the little, no, I'm not explaining that. Hungary is down here, this way. Austria, very German-aligned, soon to be annexed, down here. And of course, the big guy, Hitler, over that way. Not a good place to be. Very alone from its guarantors. And Czechoslovakia would have a little border clash with Poland. which I forget if it won or not, but that's kind of what put them off. And Czechoslovakia was supported technically by the Allies, but having Germany between them was not a good, situation to be in. And ultimately, in 1938, when the Munich crisis happened, the Allies would betray Czechoslovakia and agree to hand over the region of the Sudetenland, this part here, to Germany. Not very nice. Czechoslovakia would continue to not receive Allied aid. Czechoslovakia would continue to not receive Allied aid as it was partitioned between the various Axis nations in Europe. Later in 1938, the First Vienna War would see Transcarpathia and southern Slovakia given to Hungary, Czech Silesia given to Poland, and no, I thought they lost actually in that one. Later in 1939, Hitler, seeing the abandoned state of Czechoslovakia, would decide to fully annex the country, occupying it and splitting it into two separate protectorates, destroying the union that those 70,000 men had fought so hard for. There's more stuff with Czechoslovakia. I forget what it is now. Oh yeah, right. So, in the Sudetenland, this little place here, there was a lot of ethnic Germans. That's why Hitler wanted it originally. And so there was a lot of, lots of fascist guys coming up in this little border region here, which isn't great and kind of lended itself to being taken over by Germany, which kind of fucks over the, these guys, because this Sudetenland here is very mountainous. This is where they built all their defenses. They had forts here, they had mountains here. It was a good position. But when the Allies agreed to sign it over, even without Allied support, even though this was very defensible terrain, Czechoslovakia could not defend itself. So when this was taken in 1938, it was kind of just open country, very easy for the Germans to come in, and the Czechoslovakians didn't even really fight back. There wasn't a point. They would have gotten fucked. That's what I forgot to mention.
Tylko jedno w głowie mam, koksu 5 gram odle...
To be honest, Poland is kind of the country that I did this whole project for. I like it a lot. I think this period of its history is pretty cool. I have a lot more to talk about in terms of Poland than I have the other 3 nations I've talked about so far. So, fair warning, it's a bit disproportionate. Before declaring its own independence in 1918, in the midst of the German and Russian empires collapsing, the Polish state had not existed for over 100 years since the third partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795. However, the Polish people never ceased to exist, and when the opportunity arose to reclaim independence, the Polish seized it with fervor. Shortly after the Polish Declaration of Independence, the Soviet Union would mobilize an army trying to spread the revolution west to the territory it had lost as part of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Like that. The Poles, seeing this, would mobilize their own army and advance through Eastern Europe, reaching Kiev before the Russian armies would meet them and push them back almost to Warsaw over the course of a year. Warsaw is about here. It's about Warsaw there. It was here that the miracle on the Vistula, or the Battle of Warsaw, would occur, seeing the Polish army perform an incredible flanking maneuver on the Soviets and destroy some guys and send the rest packing back through Europe. The Polish army would chase them all the way to about this eastern border here before signing a peace treaty in 1921, the Treaty of Riga, proclaiming this as the new border between the Soviet Union and the Second Republic of Poland. It's worth noting, by the way, they probably only did that good because the Russian Civil War was still happening for most of this. There's still an entire other nation fighting Russia right now. This is pretty cool, this is good work, this is good shit. But it was a distracted, very untrained, informal Russian army trying to take this part of Europe back. Just so you know. So after losing this pretty embarrassing war to the Poles, the Soviets never quite got over it, and in the show-making business, we call this one foreshadowing. you know, foreshadowing. All right, so some geography time now. If you look at one of those funny maps with like the bumps, you know, notice that there's a large section of Europe that doesn't have those bumps. It's very flat. And Poland, as a nation, has the unfortunate flaw of being located right in this very flat area. As such, large parts of the Polish economy is very agrarian. They rely on agriculture and farms for most of their money, at least in the start here before they start trying to fix that. Okay, script flaw here. This eastern part of the new Poland is made up of western Ukraine, about here, and Belarus, about here. And this, like, that's a good amount of the new Polish territory. This multi-ethnic nature of the new state kind of caused some issues. It was a matter of not only national division, but also economic. This eastern part, formerly owned by the Russian Empire, was not nearly as well developed as the west, which had been under German control before World War I. The divide that this caused amongst the residents of the New Poland cannot be understated. It was a leading factor in political tensions, ethnic tensions, and various other problems in the country throughout the interwar years. During the interwar years, Poland would struggle with diplomacy, mostly with its neighbors. The series of clashes resulted in its formation, I didn't mention this before, to get these borders, like this is the big one, this war here, with the Soviets, that's the big one. But they also had to fight Czechoslovakia in the south for a little bit there, and Lithuania up here. Another new nation, by the way, but I don't cover this one, I don't watch it. And they had to fight those three to get their borders. And, well, that's their neighbors. So, the Soviets, Lithuania, and Czechoslovakia, oh, and the Weimar Republic, the Germans over here, almost entirely refused trade with Poland. At some point, the Weimar actually put like a embargo out on Poland, which really hurt the economy. Despite this, the Poles, with this new coastal land here, they had access to the Baltic Sea here, so they could trade internationally, but in terms of with their neighbors, it was not looking good. It wasn't very good, but this little bit of trade here kept them developing at a steady rate. Like education and the economy and the industrialization would continue through to 1939. Seeing as how diplomacy with their neighbors wasn't doing too well, Poland would reach out to the Western allies, you know, Britain and your France, for trade and also guarantees of independence, saying that, you know, if the Soviets ever try to do this again, or later, if the Germans try and invade, they'll protect them. And they would get that guarantee, but it wouldn't be as good as you might think. In 1926, a military coup by one of the generals who had taken part in the Polish-Soviet War would take place. And this would see the installment of a more authoritarian regime in Poland. They would still do elections, but it wasn't quite free in the way that it usually is, you know? They never persecuted or oppressed too hard, but they did throw some of their political enemies in jail for a bit there. But, you know, it's whatever. Happens. It's 1930s Europe, where things are happening. You know, Hitler. In 1938, Poland would receive the region of Czech Silesia as a result of the Munich crisis. However, very soon after that, in 1939, May of 1939 to be exact, the Germans and the Soviets would invade and, well, crush Poland. And this is where that guarantee from earlier comes in. The Allies would declare war on Germany in response to this, but they would do nothing against the Soviets. The Soviets would get away scotch-free, despite their, you know, occupation of this eastern part of Poland here. They would receive no recourse from the Allies for that. It's worth noting before we end off here that the Poles actually had an incredibly sizable army. They had seen this coming. I mean, who couldn't? So they had amassed about 1 million men in their army, but technologically, they were sort of far behind. They didn't have, well, they had more important shit to deal with. Anyway, that's it for interwar Poland. In conclusion, there was no hope for a stable peace in Europe. The lacking power of the League of Nations, the vast ethnic tensions and nationalist movements, the unclear and mostly self-proclaimed borders of the new nations meant that these new nations of Europe were never going to have an easy time establishing themselves. I didn't even mention it, but the Great Depression hit all of these countries just as hard as they hit the rest. And they had to deal with this, maybe a decade at latest, into their new existence. From Hungary's revolution, to Yugoslavia's oppression, to Czechoslovakia's border clashes, and Poland's bigger border clashes, these countries fought hard to exist. And ultimately, they would have their independence stolen from them by Nazi Germany. Anyway, that's it. Peace. Actually, Hungary didn't have their independence taken, but my analogy there doesn't work as well if you acknowledge that. So let's just say that, it's because Germany dominated Hungary economically and politically. So, they were sort of like a puppet state. That's still like a form of independence taken, right?